Hi, it's your favourite Atomic Blonde here with my nerdy weekly roundup. Hi everyone, so December finally here. Merry Christmas, I guess, or happy holidays, whatever floats your boat. So so we had the finale of The Peripheral this week, and I'm going to be wrapping up 1899. 4 episodes to get through. So I will obviously do like a clip notes version. I'm only planning to be here for 4 hours. And my thoughts on the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. Why don't they just call it a Christmas special? But hey, whatever. So let's get into it. The Peripheral. So yeah, season finale, pretty good. Kind of rounded things up and sets us up for a good season 2 if we get one. Not heard anything yet, and obviously it's been in number 1 in the top 10 shows most weeks, because obviously they've been dropping it weekly. So fingers crossed, it looks good for the show. But with all the money they wasted on Rings of Power, who knows what we are and aren't going to get. But hopefully this has been a bit of a money maker for them. So what happened? The episode starts with a flashback to 2028 and Flynn's visiting Connor in hospital. And they're sort of talking about, if he could go back, this time he'd take the dog out, because obviously we saw in the stub that previously he went to rescue the dog and the dog was booby trapped, and obviously that's what caused him to lose his limbs. And the whole conversation around, you get one shot in life. It's not a sim. You can't just reboot and go back and try again. We then cut to 2032, and it's the fallout of Pickett's place. So Tommy's coming out of the house. There's a bit of a flashback to him shooting the sheriff, and he's like, "What have I done?" He gets in the car and then puts the weapons back in the evidence bags and radios it in, because he's like, well, you can pin this on the hitman. Next thing we've got obviously of the police, and ambulance is there, and they're sort of taking statements, putting out APB for the hitman. But then, so Tommy thinks he's okay. He's got it all kind of covered. And then one of the policemen comes up and says, the paramedic has found a pulse, and Tommy's face is like, shit. So he goes back in the house, and he's like, oh, which one is it? And basically Pickett's got a very slight pulse. So obviously he's panicked about that. Then a call comes through that there were shots fired at the hospital, and obviously Tommy's wife's the doctor there, so he heads over there. We all know this is the outcome of the hitman trying to kill Flynn and Burton. Tommy arrives and finds that his wife's okay, and she's like, oh, she's heard about the sheriff and stuff, and what was it? Was it him? Was it hitman? And sort of Tommy's looking at her, and she's like, well, was it? And he's just like, yeah, it was, kind of thing. But you can see him sort of thinking about, should he tell her the truth or not? But just chooses to go with the story. And we then go to the future, and Flynn and Burton and Connor are there with the inspector, and she basically wants to propose an alliance with them. As we found out last time, the jackpot's already accelerating in their timeline, and the inspector's sort of basically saying, like, if you help me with the Dr. Newland problem, I can help you and help negate what's going on in your timeline, and hopefully, get things back on track. To do that, Flynn says, basically, can you help our mother? She's sick again. And the inspector kind of zones out for a minute, where she talks to the algorithms, the aunties, and basically comes back and says, like, no, there's no chance, and basically she's going to be dead in 23 days, and just sort of says it like, just obviously Flynn's devastated by this news, and she comes out the sim, and Burton's like, I'll go talk to her. yes, but then we obviously see Burton and Flynn talking, and she's just absolutely devastated and crying, because obviously the whole reason they got into this in the first place was just to save their mother. That was the only reason they were doing it, initially to make money, and then obviously to get the cure for her. We sort of cut to that evening, and the mother's on the porch, and her and Flynn are talking. And the mother's like kind of pragmatic about all of this, really, I guess, because she'd already sort of made her peace that she was going to die. And the extra time she's had, she just sort of sees as a bonus, I suppose. And basically sort of saying that, this can be a good thing, this can be a positive thing. You're not stuck here looking after me. You can go out in the world, you can grow, you can finally have your own life. And obviously this isn't what Flynn wants to hear, but she knows there's a grain of truth in all of that. So her mother's trying to sort of say, like, don't feel bad, don't feel guilty. You've sacrificed so much all these years looking after me. Like, just go out and grab the world by both hands, basically, when I'm gone. Dr. Newland, we then go say Back to the Future, and Dr. Newland's in a park and she meets with Ash. Obviously one of the character that builds the AIs for the peripherals for Lev. And obviously her and her brother were trying to steal the data the last episode, and that's when her brother's cheek all got cut open. So she's reeling from this, and it's not necessarily making the best decisions, and decides to meet with Dr. Newland, tells her that she knows where the data is, and it's basically stored in Flynn. It's in her DNA in her head. Lev knows this, and she's basically telling Newland because she doesn't want to basically get hold of this information, all the information that's in the Ori. So this is all the information that they've learned from running these different simulations in the stub over the years. And obviously there's like confidential information in that if that got out, it could bring down the governments. So Ash basically spills the beans on all of this. And the doctor says, well, what's in it for you? What do you want? And she says, like, I can help you, get all of this, basically, as long as you kill Lev, out of revenge for her and her brother. Dr. Newland says she can, but it will take a dramatic step and at an unspeakable cost. And sort of Ash thinks about this and then asks, well, what is that? What is the cost? And she said, well, basically we can trigger the jackpot and accelerate it and blow, make the silo happen, the nuclear explosion, and it will just take out Flynn and everybody, and the problem will be gone. This is sort of a bit more extreme than Ash sort of envisioned, but genie's out the bottle now. Flynn then comes back to her peripheral and meets Wilf back by the Tower of London. That seems to be their favourite spot. And she's talking to him, and he apologises to her about her mother, and sort of says, he knew the cure wasn't 100% effective, and he kind of, there was a chance that it wouldn't work, and he shouldn't have misled her into believing that there was 100% chance, and he sort of apologizes for that. And they sort of speak, and then Flynn sort of because Flynn's like, obviously, like, this is the only reason I did this kind of thing, and then she goes, well, what's happened with Alita? You found her? And he's just like, well, she's dead. That's the only conclusion I can draw, that she's dead now. There's no reason for you to be here. There's no reason to help anymore. And he goes on to talk about Alita and like how she's always been there for him, and they were in the camps together, and they kind of had their own world. And even like when they got adopted, she made sure that he came with her. She's kind of his rock, his family. And when they were kids, they were adopted, and they ran away. And they were on their own for 8 months, and they lived on the streets. And even then she protected him, and the only reason they went back was because he got ill, and again she sacrificed what they were doing so they could go back and he could obviously get treatment. And they sort of talk about his own world. He said we even had our own flag. It was like a fist but without a thumb, and she was like, well, why no thumb? And it's all about like having the thumb is like what allows you to grip and to like basically hold weapons and destroy and lots of negative things. So if you didn't have this, we kind of had this sort of utopia type thing. Then they sort of carry on talking, and Flynn sort of asks questions. It's obviously asking questions, and like, you know, and Wilf's like, I can't really answer you because, you know, there's always people listening, whether that's Lobir or whether that's Newland. So Flynn suggests that they kind of link up again, and then that way she can feel what he's feeling. So if she asks him certain questions, she can sort of feel his responses to that. That he agrees to do that, and she just sort of says names and so like Lev, and she can say how he feels, and she basically says like, do you trust Lobir? Because obviously she's made this proposition to them, and then sort of gives a feeling that it's like Lev, and then Alita, and then she says her name, and obviously there's a certain response, and then he says his name to her, and there's a certain response. So basically we just get the upshot that they just confirm that they fancy each other, right? So so all this has sort of gone on, but then it sort of triggers a thought with Flynn, and says, you know, where was this secret place? Where did you guys like hang out when you had this secret flag and all of this kind of thing? And Will's like, oh my God, why didn't they think of this before? And they go off, and then they sort of end up, it looks like probably like Hyde Park or somewhere like that. And they kind of look around, and he said, oh, you know, it used to be here. And she's like, in a park. And he goes, well, it used to be like all like forest and things, and it's very, very different now. And then they find a spot, and there's basically, you see like young Alita, as she was when she was probably about 12 or 13, sitting on a bench. And she's like, well, you know, you took your time getting here, kind of thing. And basically she says to Wilf, like, you know, we need to talk, but Flynn can't come because she doesn't trust her. Well, not so much her, but she knows, again, people are listening. And she's like, right, Ash. And then Ash is like, oh, because she's been spying on them and seeing what they're doing. So Wilf leaves with Alita. And just sort of Alita explains that, you know, this is where the camps used to be. And underneath the, you know, and he's like, I don't really remember the camps. I wasn't old enough. And she's like, well, you were 7. You should remember if you were 7. But these implants that they've got, which they're sort of told to sort of, you know, boost their immunity against the diseases, obviously, that came from the jackpot. It's actually suppressing their memories as well. And then the actual Alita appears, and she's still alive. And you can say kind of got these stitches here where she's taken her implants out. And we're a bit like, oh, how are you even alive without your immunity boost kind of thing? And she goes, well, maybe what we're being told isn't the whole truth. And going back to the camp, she says basically, you know, 5 million people were like wiped out in a fortnight, just because of the sheer fear that there might be disease in the camps around the world. And it was the Kleps that did it. So basically Lev's father came in with troops, and first of all, they took all the men and they just sort of massacred everybody. And she says, underneath the ground, your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, my parents, they're all under the soil, basically. And she gets the little Alita, goes to like start digging, and basically, you know, picks up a skull and then hands it to Wilf. And she goes on to sort of say how important it is that we get the data out of Flynn's head. All the secrets are in Flynn's head, and we can just blow everything apart. And Wilf's a bit like, he understands that, but, you know, is that the right thing to do? You know, is it for us to say what's right, what's wrong kind of thing? And there's like a handful of people arrive who are sort of ragtag band following Alita, who basically saying that, you know, people have the right to remember. We need to, you know, acknowledge what's gone on and make up our own minds. Back in the past, we're at the bar in the town, and Jasper's sitting there with kind of Pickett's cronies, these sort of drug dealers who we sort of met in the first few episodes. And they're all sort of talking about who's going to take over the business, if you like. And one of these guys, well, I was Pickett's number 2, so therefore it's me. Bear in mind that Jasper's his nephew. They're kind of just basically sort of sidelining Jasper because they just seem a bit wet and a bit pathetic. And Jasper's getting sort of more and more wound up by this. And so the other guy's like, well, I'm his number 2. And then like, no, you weren't his 2, I was, blah, blah, blah. And they were kind of arguing it out. And they just basically send Jasper off to the bar to get some more beer and being all dismissive of him. And Jasper's sort of picking up, Pickett's not even dead yet, and you're already fighting over who's next. And they're like, that's just a matter of time before he dies. Then we kind of cut to later on, and they leave the bar, and Jasper's driving them home, and they're all in the car, absolutely paralytic. One of them pukes up all over he's like, open the window, we're going to be sick, but if I open the window, he just pukes all down the window and all down himself. And they're, oh, Jasper, you'll have to clean that up because, you wash the cars kind of thing. And just Jasper's getting more and more wound up by this. So they're driving, and then, he sort of checks the car, and they're all passed out, absolutely stone cold passed out. And he pulls up the car, and he's sort of sitting there thinking for a while, and then he gets out of the car. And when he gets out of the car, we see that he's actually parked across a railway crossing. So you're like, oh, okay. And he leaves the car, goes to the side of the road and phones his wife. And it's like 2:00 in the morning. So she's like, what the hell's going on? Are you okay? Is there a problem? And he's like, no. And he starts reminiscing about this story about when they were younger, and there was him and his wife, and feeling better. They were all playing Monopoly, and he was winning. And but then basically, he has all that killer instinct, and he started loaning them money and helping them out. And then basically Burton managed to come back and win the game. And his wife made a comment about don't mistake, I think it's kindness. Don't mistake weakness for kindness. And he's like, I'm doing that. And she goes, oh, what do you mean? She goes, well, I only meant it in terms of, it'd just be nice to see you win for once. So I love you. I married you because you're a kind man. I don't think you're a weak man, And he's just like, I was like, oh God, what have I done? He goes, oh, don't worry about it. I'll be home soon and I'll call you back. And of course, he's like having second thoughts. So he runs down to the car, and the when he's got out, he's left the key in the car and locked the car. So he's banging on the windows, trying to wake them up. And like I say, they're passed out drunk. So you sleep like the dead, basically. So he's banging and banging and banging. And then we hear the train horn in the background, and we can see the trains coming. He's trying and trying and trying to wake them up. And he's literally there to very much like the last second, before the train gets there. But the train just as the train's coming, when the guys in the front seat sort of finally kind of stirs because we've got this train lights. He's like, what the fuck's going on? And boom, train hits, car explodes. And Jasper's just like, what have I done? What have I done? We cut to the next day, and Flynn's sort of heading into town, and she sees Tommy. And Tommy sort of stops her and says, look, like we all know that, there's something going on. I know you've got your secrets, and I'm not prying, but, there's rumors going around, and obviously intel from the police that there's a cell, and that there's rumors that the terrorists are going to blow up the silo. And he's like, would you know anything about that? And she's like, no. He's like, come on, like this is serious. If there's anything and she's like, no, I don't know anything about it. And cycles off. Obviously, as soon as she gets in town, the first thing, she goes straight to the future to try and find Wilf, to say, Lula's trying to bloody blow up my town, and trigger the jackpot. What's going on? Obviously, Wilf's, we think, is still off with Alita, but she comes across Ash and says to Ash, this is what's going on. And Ash is always like, yeah, I know. And she's like, what have you done? And then Ash basically says, look, I spilled the beans. I told them everything. And explains to her that she's got the data in her head, and it's basically stored in her DNA, and that she panicked and she didn't want Lev to have this information. they all believe that Alita's dead. But now Newland knows about it, and obviously this is the solution. We then see sort of Flynn's in this warehouse, and Connor arrives in his peripheral, and she sort of says to him that this is what's going on. They're trying to nuke the town basically and accelerate the jackpot. I've got a plan. So we've got to do something. I know I've got a plan. You're not going to like the plan, but I've got one. And she's basically going to need his help, and she's going to need Inspector Newbeer's help. Flynn then goes to Newbeer, asks her, like, I asked you once before, do you have the power to sever, access to the stub? And she's like, no, I don't. But she goes, well, do you have the power to open a new stub? And she sort of says, look, that's a very dangerous thing to do in this time. It can be seen as an act of war. It's not something I can do, but I can tell you how you can do it. It sort of gives her the lowdown of where she needs to go and what she's going to face. Is going to be peripherals there guarding it, etc. Flynn then arrives at looks like a church, and there's a guy outside just sort of sweeping up, and obviously this is one of the peripherals guarding it. They have a fight, and she manages to she sees there's like a reader in the wall. They have a bit of a fight, and she manages sort of gets him and shoves his face against it, so he opens the door, takes him out. She walks in, there's probably another 4 or 5 peripherals all standing around the table and obviously guarding the access to the server. And these obviously kick in, and fight ensues, and these peripherals all link back to Dr. Newland, so she can see the connection, she can see what's going on. And obviously Flynn is fighting with these guys, these peripherals, and manages to sort of take them down. And then there's like a sort of stone table, and she's got this pocket watch, and when she puts the pocket watch in, that then sort of triggers opening the server, and then she can kind of put in what she wants, and you can see that she's opening a new stub in 2032. And she knows that Newland's obviously got a connection, and Newland starts talking through one of the peripherals that's on the ground, and things just basically say, like, I am going to hunt you, and I'm going to track you down, and I am going to kill you for what you've done, and what you're planning to do. And Newland's like, well, I don't know exactly where you are, and then she sort of clocks what Flynn's doing and open a new stub, and she's like, goes, well, I'm going to know where you are, but you won't know where I am, not without coordinates. And she takes the pocket watch and then destroys it. So basically the stub's open, but Newland can't track where she's been. We then cut back to like a flashback of Flynn explaining the plan to Connor. And it's basically she'll open a new stub, and obviously life will go on in that stub, and there'll be a version of her in that stub, and everybody's going to be okay. But she needs to die in their stub. So Newland doesn't come after them, and she doesn't detonate or make the silo attacked and the nuclear weapons go off. So Connor's just like, I can't do this, and she's like, well, you have to, and I won't be dead. I'll be alive in the stub, and I'll be alive here. My consciousness, will be here. And because he was a sniper when he was in the Marines, and he's like, what about Burton? She says, you can't tell Burton because Burton will try and talk me out of it. This is the right thing to do. So then she says, I'll go for a walk, and I'll count to 10, and at the end of that, you just take me out. And he reluctantly agrees to do this because he does know that there is going to be another version of her. So then we just literally cut to her walking along, and sort of talking away, and she's counting back from 10 and sort of just thinking and sort of thinking her life through and things like that. And she pretty much gets to 10, and the camera pans out, and we've sort of seen Connor there with his rifle, and obviously he's teary. And the camera just sort of pans back, and you just sort of see the woodlands, and you hear a gunshot. and the plan is that basically, obviously, Connor takes her out, but they'll just make it look like that Newland or Lowbeer had sort of sent someone to take her out and tidy up the loose ends, and they can basically blame it on them. And it ends. Then we see actually that we see Flynn's peripheral in the future, and obviously she wakes up because her consciousness has arrived there. She's sitting with the inspector, Lowbeer, and the inspector says, shall we go to work then? And then ends. But then there is an end credit scene, and it cuts to Lev. He's sort of going into some sort of like a private club with his wife, and he's supposed to be meeting his father. And when he arrives, there's like sort of 3 old men sitting there, and his wife just sort of says, "What have you done?" And he goes, "I haven't done anything." So obviously this is like, because they're all supposed to be sort of a bit of a mafia type Russian family, and he knows he's in trouble, and his father basically sends his regrets. He wasn't feeling very well, and they've sort of been sent as the messengers kind of thing. And it's basically saying, what have you been doing around the research institute, and whose feathers have you been ruffling? And he says, he had an insider there, and they're like, that's fine, we all need to keep tabs on the RI, etc. But basically, you're drawing too much attention. You need to go shut it down, and you need to get rid of any links to this. And Lev sort of says, well, all links, and he's like, and they're like, yeah, remove all assets. And like, this is a warning that, you screw up again, and it's too late for apologies. You're going to be taken out. So and then that was the end. So quite a good finale, all set up, say, for season 2. So yeah, in terms of learning around, what the technology is, that everybody's memories are all being suppressed, obviously, following the jackpot, and then people being in camps and just massacring people. Something, a lot more's gone on than what we've been shown. We just sort of showed there was diseases, but obviously they were just taking people out at the sheer thought that there might be a disease in the camp. They didn't even prove it. So there's a lot of suppression, and we get the impression it's quite a totalitarian state now, and everybody sort of has enough freedom on their leash. And really it's all just set up for Flynn to go after Dr. Newland in season 2. It's all about getting revenge on Dr. Newland. So I really hope there is a season 2. I've really enjoyed the peripheral. It's lots of sort of backwards and forwards between time zones, periods in time, but it's not confusing. It's not hard to follow. I think it's been done really well. I'm sort of halfway through the book. It's quite the style of the writing and the language used is they've done a really good job adapting, actually, because I think it could have been incredibly confusing, and they've done quite a good job of the adaptation so far. So yeah, bring on season 2. 1899. Okay, so 4 episodes. Obviously, I'm going to kind of go through the highlights of these 4 episodes. I can't sit here for 4 hours talking about it, but I have absolutely loved this show. I love the season finale, where it's all got to. It's absolutely bang on in terms of the writers, or what I'd expect from the writers from Dark. Like, every time you think you know what's going on, they just lob a curveball in. And oh my God, the ending. See, God, if there's not a season 2, because they tend to write things in a 3-season arc, these writers. So given the ending, if there's not a season 2 or season 3, I am going to be gutted. Now, it has been in the top 10 for quite a few weeks. I imagine it'll probably start dropping out the top 10 with lots of people watching Christmas stuff. But yeah, I really hope people go check this out. It won't be for everybody. Some people will be watching it just going, what's this crap? I can't follow what's going on. And they're all speaking foreign. I'm not reading subtitles, but do go check it out. I really love this show. So episodes sort of 5 to 8. It's all really around sort of the convergence of what the hell's going on. We know they're on this ship. They're all hiding stuff. They've all got backstories. They've found these shafts under the beds that lead to these their memories or these worlds, things that have happened to them. And at the start of every episode, a different character is in their memory, and then they get this wake up, and then they wake up and they're back on the ship. So this one, like the others, this one's Moira's. She's in a hospital gown, kind of on these moors. We keep seeing like where she's gone. She's like on these moors, and then there's the asylum, and there's the grave. So she's there, and she heads to the asylum. And when she's in the asylum, there's like two guys, and she's like in a hospital gown, and they strap her to a chair, and they go to inject her, and she's like dragged and screaming, and like, "Where's my brother? What have you done?" And then we get the whole wake up. Then they wake up and they're back in the dining room, and Daniel's there saying, "Oh, you fell asleep." And she's where's the boy? And they're like, they locked him back in the cupboard. So there's a kid stuck in the cupboard, and you just hear this banging, and and she gets up and she's like, "Well, you can't shut him in a cupboard." So she's trying to get him out the cupboard, and everybody's like, "No way, he was thrown overboard, he was dead, and he's turned up in this room. Are you insane?" So anyway, she keeps like pushing to get the kid. The captain asks her again, like, what's your connection with this child? Why were you in the passenger list of the Prometheus? And she kind of looks at him, and she's like, I don't know. And we then cut to the sort of third class passengers, and it's talking around now. Obviously, they've sort of split into two groups, and the crew is sort of saying, "Well, what are we going to do if the mutiny's kind of failed now, and mutiny's punishable by death? What are we going to do?" And Ivan, the religious lady, like Tove's mum, is just sort of saying, "It'll be fine if we have faith. It'll all play out. It'll be good." And we see Tove talking to her brother Cresta, and just saying, what have you done? I can't. You basically helped our mother murder a boy. Like, you let her throw him overboard, and she's just saying, you just following her blindly. As well as I do, she doesn't hear God. She's not well. She hears voices. She's like a bit crazy is basically what she's saying. And you've allowed her to like kill a child. And killing a child isn't God's work. And the brother turns around and says to her, like, "Well, you killed someone." And just the look of horror on her face and hurt is just like, oh, so it's like she just got slapped around the face. She's so taken aback by his comment, and she's just like, "Well, that was different." And she sort of obviously gets up quite upset. She picks up one of the shotguns, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, what I should have done, and doing the right thing." And she leaves. She then goes to the dining room, goes to the captain and says, look, I'm here to help, explains like her mother's a bit cray-cray. There's all this banging, like, when they realise that the boy's in the cupboard. And then Moira goes to let him out, and there's basically everybody's like pulling their guns, and it's all getting a bit out of control. And the guns fired. And then it's almost like this sort of wave happens, like ripple wave happens, and basically time slows down and then freezes. And Moira's stood there, and everybody else is frozen, and she's able to walk up and like grab a bullet, and lets the boy out of the cupboard. And obviously they run off, they leave, and they're like, he's just like, "Come on, we haven't got time." And the pyramid that he has basically caused this so they can get away. Time restarts, everybody's freaking out. Like, where did she go? What the hell's happening? And then there's this siren sound. And then most of the passengers, nearly all of the passengers, then sort of go into this trance. And it's almost like this metronome noise. And they're like marching almost in time to this metronome. And they all just sort of turn around and leave. And that kind of leaves like our core characters, like the sort of captain. Obviously, Moira's not affected. The boy's not affected. Tove's not affected. But they just see all these people suddenly, where are they all going? What's happening? and they all sort of march up and make their way to the deck, and then they just sort of walk up to the edge and then just start chucking themselves overboard. And obviously there's like about 1,500 people on board, and they all just start walking up and chucking themselves overboard. And obviously they're trying to stop them, but it's like they just don't see or hear anybody, and they're just following this course of action. And we see young Mi's mother and Cresta, Tove's brother. They hear this noise and they both throw themselves overboard. The father tries to stop Cresta, and he's just devastated because obviously they've already lost one child, now they've lost two. And the same with Young Mi trying to stop her mother. The boy basically then takes her back to the sort of cabins, and she asks him, you know, what is happening? What do you know? And he just writes down that they're listening. And they go into the shafts, and they end up back in where she was dreaming of, this sort of mall type place with the grave and then the big asylum. And they head towards there. Daniel follows them, and so Moira goes to the asylum. Daniel's followed them, and he meets up with the boy, and then it's clear that Daniel knows the boy, and he sort of said, "Please put Daniel, the boy, in a safe place." And they say, "We've never got this far before." And the boy's like, "But she still doesn't remember anything. She doesn't know who I am." And Daniel's like, "You need to be patient. We need to stop this before they sink the ship again." Moira ends up at the asylum, where two men grab her and then tie her to the chair as per her dream. Then we see the old man who's been watching them, and she's sort of screaming at him like, "Where's her brother? And what's going on?" And he keeps telling her that she's asking the wrong questions. She's then drugged, and then she wakes back up on the ship on the bed, and she goes to look for the captain. The captain is just like, "Right, you need to like level with me. What's going on?" Moira explains that her name is actually Moira Singleton, as in the name of the guy who owns the liners. He owns the businesses for that, the ship company. And she thinks this is all one big experiment on like human behavior. And she has a letter the same as his, and that for some reason they were all brought there, and that somehow they've been on the Prometheus before, but she doesn't know how. They then go to the shaft in the captain's room, and they arrive at his sort of family home again, and she's sort of trying to explain like where she went to in her room and then his room. They continue to keep receiving the message to sink the ship, but this time it's basically Daniel sort of says like they're not talking about the Prometheus, because they're like, well, why are they still sending this message? We're not even with the Prometheus anymore. And he's like, they're actually referring to this ship, the Kerberos. And then the first mate has sent a message back to the old man, and we see him in his study, and he looks at this message, and then he just looks out the window, and it's this kind of wasteland with this massive Great Pyramid, and that's where that episode ends. The next episode starts with Tove, and she's in a forest, and she's running through the forest. Obviously, she's not pregnant. This is prior to them coming on the ship. And she's like sort of chasing and looking for her sister Ada, and then she finds her sister, and she's like, "Come on, we've got to go back. You know, we can't be playing games." And her sister's sort of like, "Oh, catch me if you can," and runs and hides behind a tree. And then sort of Tove goes to follow her, and then this guy steps out from behind the tree and just says, "Gotcha." And then we get the wake up, and then Tove wakes up. And she's like really distressed by this dream and this guy. So they need a plan of action. Pretty much everybody's thrown themselves overboard that they can tell. There's a handful of them left. So they decide they need to get the engine started and find some land. So obviously, because it's meant to be 1899, they decide that all the men should go down and shovel coal, which I'd be fine with, quite frankly, and get the engines going. The women will will search and see if they can find any survivors, and another couple will go to deck and try and figure out what's going on, kind of thing. As they're searching the ship, sort of strange things start to happen to ship, and we start seeing these kind of charcoal sort of shafts sort of coming out of the wood. If you think about like the Fortress of Solitude, it's kind of coming out like this and like this and like this, but it's like sort of grey charcoal colour starts appearing around the ship. While they're sort of searching, the character who's the madam, she sort of touches some of this stuff, and then her finger starts to turn black and it starts to travel up her hand. The captain and Moira go back to the shaft in her room and head to the asylum for some answers, while everybody else is sort of searching the ship. Daniel follows them. While they're at the asylum, Moira and the captain, they walk into the big room where the chair is, and there's some doors, and they open the doors where there should be a view, but basically it's just like metal paneling and rivets, so it looks like the hull of the ship. They explore somewhere else and try and not pull some paneling off the wall. Again, it looks like the hull of the ship. They're like, what the hell is going on? We sort of cut to Tov's father and the priest, and they've been tasked with like trying to figure out what's going on, send SOS messages. The first officer is supposed to be there, but he's left because obviously he's part of this, so he knows nobody's going to reply to the SOS, and he's got things he needs to do in terms of what's going on. And the father sort of starts talking to the priest, and sort of just saying, how he used to be, he wasn't always a priest himself. He used to be a farmer, and life was simpler then, and he was happy when he was just a farmer. And then his wife started hearing voices, and she thought it was the voice of God, and she said, like, do you hear it? And he said, yeah, I hear it. And he goes, I never heard the voice. I know it's just in her head, but I just wanted her to be happy, and I just, went along with it. And like now, I just where's it led us, and I don't think I even believe in God anymore. And the other priest, who's also another false priest, sort of gives him some comfort and just says, sorry for your loss and because of his son. So while the others are searching for survivors, Tov sees Cresta, who we know has already thrown himself overboard, but she sees him and then goes after him and follows him. And she goes through a door, and then she ends up in this field. And the farmer that she saw in her dream, there's like a sort of haystack, and she walks around the haystack. This farmer's pointing a shotgun at Cresta, and he's like, basically, like, you're here, and then goes to fire the shotgun at Cresta. She runs and goes no, and sort of knocks the gun. And obviously this is how Cresta got the scar on his face. It's like, obviously, rather than killing him, it's grazed his cheek, and all his cheeks just exploded. And then she's like back on the ship, obviously hysterical. And she's like, what the hell is going on? Really distressed. The first officer makes his way to the dining room and gets in the cupboard that the boy was in, and there's kind of like a light, and so we know that's taken him somewhere. The captain and Moira carry on exploring the asylum, and they have a conversation where she explains that she was speaking to the boy. The boy told her that people are listening, and the only people that can give you answers are the creator. And he's like, well, who's the creator? And she's like, I assume it's my father. I don't know. We then come back to poor old Tov, and she's back in the field again. But this time it's like the scene's frozen. So there's Cresta holding his face. Her mother and father are there now, and this guy with the shotgun. And the scene's initially like frozen, And then when she arrives, it triggers it and it starts to play out. So this guy with a shotgun is like seeking retribution. He's really angry, and obviously we've discovered through previous episodes that Crester's homosexual, and obviously back then it was illegal, and given that he's from a very religious family, this is not okay. And the farmer's basically saying that, you've touched my son, you've done unspeakable things with my son. And we assume that this obviously was consensual, but obviously the father's not having it. And it was basically like, you've taken something from me, and like, if you've sinned, do you believe as a sinner there should be like retribution, or you should be punished if you're a sinner? And the father and the mother are kind of there and sort of begging him not to kill the son, and maybe we can come to some arrangement. So he says that, so you've taken something from me, so I'm going to take something from you. And he grabs hold of Tove and like knocks her out. He's got the rifle and knocks her out. We then sort of see her on the ground, and she's kind of coming to, and the guy's on top of her, and he's raping her. And it's pretty gross, to be honest, in terms of basically you've got her mother, her father, and her brother all just sitting there letting this happen. Like this is okay somehow. I don't know any parent that would just sit there and watch their daughter be raped. So yeah, it's pretty. It's not graphic in that sense, but it's pretty like, this is pretty twisted. Especially it's supposed to be so religious, and somehow this is okay. It's like, oh, so but good for Tove. She sort of obviously fully comes to and realizes what's happening to her. We assume as well that there's no boyfriend, so she's probably a virgin. And she sort of reaches around and gets a rock and hits the guy. Initially gets him off her, but then he grabs her and punches her. I mean, and again, her family are just sitting there doing blooming nothing. And there's they carry on fighting, and he knocks her down and punches her, and she manages to grab another rock and sort of hits him a few times. And then she sort of gets up and stumbles, and he comes after her, but she manages to get to his shotgun, and she shoots him. So this is obviously what the brother was alluding to, saying, well, you've killed someone. And you can see why it was different. The guy was doing something absolutely abhorrent to her. And obviously she's been pregnant all the way through this. And there was never any mention of a baby, of the father. And the mother was always saying how this is like God's baby or God's will or something, which is, I think this is why Tove is so, like, mother's just insane. There's nothing good about this baby. So she wakes back up on the ship, but her face is still covered in blood from wherever she just was. And Lucien's wife finds her, and she's obviously just so distressed and sobbing. She's just had to relive probably the worst thing that's ever happened to her, and just comforts her basically. In the engine room, you kind of got Lucien and Jerome having a conversation, and Lucien apologizes to Jerome, and he's like obviously still angry, like, well, for making me a dessert do this, and you've got everything you wanted. And Lucien basically says, well, no, not really, and explains to him that he's dying. They finally get the engines up and running, and the two priests go up to try and figure out where they are, looking at all the maps, and they're like, look, we need to figure this out. And they start opening all the books to try, and they go, well, you're going to read a book to figure out how to drive the ship. And they're like, yeah, why not? We'll figure this out. But every single book they open, the only words in the book are, may your coffee kick in before your reality does. Every single book. And they're just like, the first officer is now kind of in this wasteland with the pyramid, with the old man. And the old man's, what are you doing here? You're breaking protocols. And he's like, well, I had to come. Things are kind of getting out of hand. And the old man starts explaining. He also talks a bit in riddles. People only see what they want to see. They just need to shift their perspective, and and they could work out what's going on. And so this whole conversation happens. And he basically tells him he's got to go find the boy, and he's standing in front of the pyramid. This wood-like structure, whatever it is, charcoal, wooden things, are now spreading to the asylum. They're all starting to appear there. And the captain, her guy, goes to touch it, and Daniel arrives and like tells them not to. And the captain kind of like, well, you know what's going on. You like what you're part of this kind of thing. And Daniel's just very much like, I'm not going to let this happen again. I'm not going to leave her again. And the captain sort of goes to defend Moira from Daniel, because he doesn't understand, we don't know if he's a good or bad guy, what the hell's going on. We know Daniel is sort of saying he's trying to protect Moira. There's a bit of a scuffle and gun falls on the floor, and Daniel takes out his device, and then the captain just disappears. He's basically sent back to his memory. He's sent back to his house. And Moira's like, who are you? What the hell's going on? And Daniel tells her that they were married 12 years ago. He's her husband. She's taken aback by this, and she doesn't believe him. She takes the device off him and locks him in a room, and she heads back to the ship. And he's like, obviously pleading with her, like, let me out. I've got to stop this. I've got to stop this from happening again. Don't, like, Moira open the door, but she legs it back to the ship. And then we see that a storm is like heading towards the boat, and they're in grave danger. The captain, from his memory, goes to the shaft, makes his way to the shaft, back onto the boat. However, this boat is absolutely deserted and damaged, and when he basically gets up onto the deck, he realizes that he's on the Prometheus. And when he looks out the window, there's just dozens of these ships, all duplicate ships, all in the same state. And we go to episode 7. Nearly there, guys. Yes, well, this one starts with a little bit of, how's your father? So we see Daniel and Moira in bed making love, and there's a conversation between them, and there's lots of talking about what's reality, what's memories, how does the brain work, and make sure that you never forget. And Daniel's up there. We hear this siren. Moira's got up. She's left the room. Daniel hears this siren, and we hear this shutdown is going to be commencing. He quickly gets dressed and goes after Moira. And we see he's in this wasteland looking at the asylum, and then we get the wake up. Daniel's still in the asylum. He's trying to find a way out. He manages to take like a sort of still, there's a what do you call it? We've got the saline solution kind of thing, so one of these poles, and manages to wedge off one of the steel panels from the hole that obviously the Moira and the captain found. There's a mass of wires and stuff behind it, but he manages to get in and starts crawling through all these wires. The storm is hitting the ship. Moira arrives back in her room, and then there's a point of showing us that the room number, the cabin room number, is the same as the room number in the asylum, so 1101. Everybody agrees that they need to try and find the captain because the storm is hitting. They need someone to sail the ship, otherwise they're going to sink. But obviously nobody knows where the captain is. We know he's stuck on the Prometheus. We start to see that Moira runs into the first officer, who's now back on the ship. So obviously we know he's working for the other dude. Says that she's looking for the captain, and they said, well, we thought he was with you. And she goes, well, he was with me, but I thought he's come back to the ship. And he asked her about the boy and how she found the boy. And obviously she's like, no, I don't know where the boy went. And obviously because he's looking for the boy, for the old dude. And this wooden charcoal stuff is really starting to spread around the ship now. And we see the first officer go into a room, and he pulls out a drawer, and there's like a tablet in there, and it's kind of got like a schematic of the ship, sort of real time, and he starts searching through that. Moira goes to the captain's room and down the shaft to his memory to see if she can find the captain there. The house is there and the captain's wife appears, but she just keeps saying the same three things over and over, like, can I help you? Are you lost? And she just starts repeating. It becomes more like electronic voice, like it's just a program that's running. So Moira runs up from there. She knows the captain's not there. We keep periodically seeing Daniel going through these wires, then coming out into one of the other memories, because obviously we've seen where we see these dreams, each episode, these are basically their memories. So you see him starting to arrive in these different memories. The guys on the deck say that because the storm's coming, they're like, right, we've got to get down to the engine room and warn the guys in the engine room, and hopefully obviously there's some of the crew still down there, so they might know how to steer the boat if we can't find the captain. So they sort of head out to try and get down to the engine room. They finally sort of get down there, and basically tell them that the storm's coming. One of the crew says, look, we've got to get all the bulkheads shut, otherwise, it's just going to fill up with water when the waves start coming over. Tov and he goes off to close the bulkheads. Some of the other crews will come up and help you figure out what we need to do. Moira heads to Daniel's cabin, the one next door, and goes into the shaft under his bed and into his memory. And this is basically the room or the bedroom we saw at the beginning in Daniel's dream, where they were together. And so she starts looking around and she sees all these photos. It's like dozens of photos of her and Daniel and the boy. So she's basically his mother. This is like sort of really sort of takes her back, because she doesn't remember any of this. And then Daniel arrives in this memory, because he's going from memory to memory, and she's sort of just looking at him, and he explains that it's our son Elliot. You're his mother. And she's like, well, I don't remember this. I remember being a mother. I remember being pregnant. I remember giving birth. And he sort of says, well, you don't want to remember. And she's like, what do you mean? He goes, you don't want to remember the pain. You don't want to remember. You didn't want to remember. We have a quick flashback to the first officer. He then finds a room that has sort of a flashing pulsing light, and he's just like, gotcha. And that means he's found the boy. Oleg and Yingmi make it to the bridge, and sort of obviously grab hold of the steering wheel, is that what you call it? And obviously try to sort of settle the ship, because it needs to be in a certain direction so they don't sink. After sort of Moira kind of accepts that, even though she doesn't remember it all, she doesn't think he's lying. He explains, look, we've got to get back. We've got to get back to the ship. He explains to her that basically in a simulator, and this just keeps playing over and over, and she has to wake up. She has to remember, because if she doesn't remember, they're all going to be stuck in a simulator forever. So they head back to the ship. He says he's after a code. He needs a code. It could be anything. Could be any kind of object. And she sort of says, I've got this pendant, and she opens the pendant with a key in it. And he's like, if you had it all this time. And she said, well, no, my brother sent it to me. It's what came in the letter. So he's like, that's probably it. That's what we need. Daniel then heads to the room that the first officer was in and gets the same tablet out and starts making some changes on that. And she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, he can't stop the shutdown, but he can make some changes which will slow it down and basically buy them some time. He explains that this voyage has happened multiple times, and it only ever lasts 8 days, and they never get to their destination. You see Yingmi looks out. She's obviously she's in the wheelhouse, looks out and sees her mother on the deck. She goes running out, even though those waves crashing everywhere. She runs out to sort of get her mother, or sees her mother, and Oleg goes after her. and with these waves crashing, and then like the mother disappears. Oleg kind of managed to grab hold of her, but then this massive wave crashes in and washes Oleg overboard, so he's gone. We then have seen that Lucien starts having a seizure in the engine room, and his wife and Jerome getting back to the cabin to try and give him his serum, his medicine. When they get there, the vials are empty, and basically this time Lucien's died of the seizure, and Jerome's just like, he's gone, there's nothing we can do. In the engine room, there's where obviously the waves are crashing in, and the water, there's some sort of debris and stuff falls down and hits Angel, and he's crushed and killed. So we know the simulator is heading towards shutdown. It's basically just sort of starting to pick off the remaining crew, the remaining passengers. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. And then we get to the point where like the water's starting to come in, as they hadn't managed to close all the bulkhead doors in time. And the Tove's there with her mother, her father, and the crewman. And her mum's gonna, saying, this is my time. God wants me to die. I'm gonna stay. And the daughter's like, don't be so ridiculous. You're not hearing God. Like, just save yourself. Stop. And she goes to leave and take her father, but her father chooses to stay at the end with the woman he loves. And the crewman helps bundle Tove out as the water fills in, but then he has to close the bulk door and basically sort of sacrifices himself. He pushes Tove through so he can close the door on her side, but the other side's filling it with water. So he drowns, her parents drown. So they're dropping like flies at this point. The first officer takes the boy to the old man, and this is Moira's father, we found out, the head of the shipping company, or this is still is. So this is actually his grandson. And he's sort of looking at the monitors, and again, he just says, like, every single time they make the same decisions, they make the same mistakes because they make all their decisions based on emotions, which is like, basically saying, but they're made on emotions, not logic, so they make the wrong decisions. And every single time they die, and we're just stuck in this bloody loop. And feelings just cloud the decisions, and they make you weak. So we're kind of a bit of a measure of what Moira's father's like, that he doesn't believe in feelings and he just thinks they're all a waste of time. He then makes an announcement on a sort of tannoy system that they can hear on the ship, talking to Daniel and Moira, saying basically, I've got your son. If you bring the key, I will swap. You can have your son back, and I'll have the key. And the pyramid box that the boy has been holding all this time, when he opens the lid, there's a little key slot, and we've seen the key, so we know the key fits in. And on the little lid, it says, "Wake up." The shutdown is starting to happen. And then the storm starts to clear, and then this sort of big portal in the water, like a whirlpool, kind of opens up, and the boat sails down into this whirlpool. And it kind of just sort of sails down into this whirlpool, and then kind of arrives in this another open, clear piece of water, all completely calm. But then they're just a ship with all these dozens and dozens of other ships, including the Prometheus. So this is where the captain ended up, but they say there's just dozens and dozens of these identical ships. So you can sort of see how many times this simulation has run. It's like 30, 40, 50 times. And the ship obviously pulls up sort of next to the Prometheus, and you just sort of see the captain looking at them and them looking at the captain. And that's the end of episode 7. So last episode 8, where does this story go? So it starts off with the boy Elliot on a beach playing with his mother Moira, and he comes over and says, "Oh, look, I found." And it's a little beetle, and they're the beetles that we saw earlier on, that when he puts them down, they unlock the doors and all those kind of things. And they're sort of talking and giggling and having a great time. But then the boys in this wasteland that we keep seeing with the asylum, and there's just a hospital gown on the floor, and he's calling out for his mum. And then we get the wake up. Then we wake up, and this is Elliot's dream, the boy. And he's still in the study with what we now know is his grandfather. And he sort of says, you know, I bet you haven't been told the real reason why you're here or why we're here and what's actually going on. And, you know, your father hasn't been totally honest with you. And if you're brave enough, I will show you the truth. Dun, dun, dun. The captain manages to make it. Assume he swims across or gets a lifeboat or something, but see him sort of get back up on the on the ship with the others. Moira explains to the captain that Daniel's actually her husband, and he's trying to help them. He's not working for her father. Obviously, the captain's quite taken aback by this news, because they seem to have a little bit of an attraction early on. And again, when she sort of drops the bombshell that the boy's her son, everybody's like, what? But she doesn't remember any of it. She doesn't remember having a son or a husband. And then she tells everybody that her father owns the ship company. This is obviously what she's already told the captain. And somehow he's made them all forget, and they don't, you know, that made her forget and made them all forget about who they are and where they come from, and that this is all this simulation. And they all just think she's a bit bonkers. So she says to them, okay, do you remember getting on board then? And they're like, well, of course I remember getting on board. And she goes, well, what happened? And then they all sort of stand there and sort of think about it. Because about sort of 6 of them left at this point. And they actually go, they don't remember coming on board. They just been on board. So they're sort of making their way. She's sort of explaining to them about this key, and that they're in this simulation, and there's sort of nowhere to go. And the only way to get out of this is her working with Daniel to get them to wake up, to get out of this simulation. As I said, they all think she's a bit cray-cray. So sort of Tov, Lucian's wife, Jerome, who else is left? The madam, who this black stuff is now sort of really sort of starting to spread. It's like a whole hand and kind of, you know, working its way up. So we're and the priest, like, so we're going to go in a lifeboat. We're getting off this ship. And Moira's like, it's not real sea out there. There's nowhere to go. And they're just a bit like, yeah, whatever, love. Good luck. So they all go off to try and find a lifeboat. The captain, who obviously is seeing the shafts and going in and out of memories, he's not quite sure what to believe, but he kind of knows that something really weird's happening. So he sticks with Moira. They run back to her room to go down the shaft, but the shaft has disappeared. There's nothing there now. So they then go into Daniel's room, and his shaft is still there. And her and the captain go into there. We see a flash of Daniel, who's back, sort of trying to get into the ship's electricals, where we saw him before, where he sort of plugs in his little device, and he's trying to figure that out. Whatever he's doing is now sort of accelerating the shutdown, and these stalactite wooden things are just exploding across the ship now. It's accelerating it. The grandfather has taken and the configuration of the ship starts to change. So as the guys are trying to get to the lifeboat, there'd be a door, but as they go to get to the door disappears, and so the whole configuration and thing is starting to break down. We then go back to the grandfather and Elliot, and he's he's in the room with the chair. And the grandfather injects him with like a remembering serum. And then the boy's sitting there in a gown, and it's Moira and Daniel. And Daniel's saying, you can't do this. You know, this isn't right. You need to let him go. And Moira's like, no, this is the right thing to do. And she injects Elliot with some serum. And she says, it's going to be okay. This is the only way that we can be together. So then the boy kind of jolts out of this memory, and the grandfather explains that, you know, she's been fascinated ever since a kid about realities and what's reality, and, you know, is it what we see, what's in our brain? Does our brain make our own realities? And she's basically took it a step too far in the sense that, so basically the boy, her son, was dying, and she sort of created this reality to put him into so he could stay alive. But it's trapped everybody. Everybody's sort of trapped in this reality now. And she's sort of, and there's a line that God is the creator of reality. So you can play your own God. And she was like, so the only reality is God's reality, and we're just his sort of playthings. And the grandfather goes on to say like this is basically like a doll's house that she built for you to live in. And the boy's like devastated by this. He's really upset that everybody's trapped, and they've been going through these cycles trying to get her to remember all this time when she put him in there in the first place. The captain and Moira are now sort of moving through the different memories, same as what we saw Daniel doing. And as the ship's breaking down, the simulation's breaking down, they open doors, and now the passengers, they open a door, and now they're sort of in the memories as well. So we see them going into like Jerome's memory, so they're kind of in the desert. They go into Yingmi's, and they're like, you know, in Asia and all these kind of things. So they're all kind of like, what the hell is going on? Maybe we are in a simulation, but all this stuff is just like everything is now sort of really breaking down. They find out that and the reason the simulation is breaking down so quickly is obviously where Daniel's managed to sort of hack into the ship system, and he's hacked into the mainframe, and to cover his tracks, he's sort of breaking down the walls of reality so they can't see like where he's been. The old man, the grandfather, is there with the boy saying like, you know, whatever your father's doing is dangerous. He's going to get us all trapped in here forever, and don't be fooled. He's not doing this for you. He's doing it for her. You know, all this is like trying to get her to wake up. And he's like, if he had to choose between you and your mother, he'd choose your mother every single time. This poor kid has just found out what's going on. He's feeling betrayed. I mean, he's constantly close to tears. It's been like information overload. Captain and Moira arrive back at the sort of asylum. The first officer is there, and they realise that obviously he's been working for the father all along, and he's there to get the key, and she's like basically hand over the key or else kind of thing, and he takes one of those devices out of his pocket and and basically kills the captain. He's just bumped down. And Moira's like, just, you know, really upset by this, but hands over the key and goes with him to see her father. So they basically go through the cycle again, that Moira's strapped into the chair. She's given the serum to forget, getting ready for the whole cycle to start all over again in a new simulation. Then we sort of basically, the ship is really, it's now counting down. And the simulation just totally breaks apart, and the guys are sort of left to sort of just looking what the hell, it's all red and just dissolving in front of them. The grandfather takes the key, puts it in the pyramid, turns it, and nothing happens. And they realized that the thing Daniel was doing in the mainframe was changing the code. And then the simulation ends. Moira wakes up. She's outside on that sort of moor again, and there's the grave, and there's like a shaft of light shining down on this grave. She goes over to it. There's a bedroom under the boys' bedroom is underneath. And Daniel meets her there, and she's like, "What is this? Am I awake? What's going on?" And he explains this is the first simulation we ever built. And he says, while I was in there, I changed some things. So the pyramid that the old man has is worthless. It doesn't do anything. And he's got like one of those Rubik's cubes from the 80s, the pyramid ones. Opens that and says, like, this is the wake up pyramid now. And the key is your wedding ring. So it takes the wedding ring off and puts it in. She's like, well, he explains again, say, yeah, they're in their first simulation. And she's like, well, will you be there when I wake up? And he's like, I'll always be there. But we've got to do this, right? And don't forget. So she puts the ring in the slot. Then we see her eyes open. Oh, sorry, before that, he explained that all the time that she's been in the simulation, her brother has taken over the simulation. And basically, he's doing all this to get her out because her brother's got to be stopped. It's a much wider, bigger thing than what she can even comprehend right now. So when she wakes up, her eyes open, she looks around, and then it's like thing opens, and she steps out, and she's in a room, a circular room, quite a futuristic room, and she looks round, and the passengers are all in these sort of stasis. They're all sort of hooked up in stasis. And she looks around and sees all that, the captain and Ying-Mi and Oleg and all these guys. And she's like looking around what the hell is going on. She goes over to a monitor. And on the monitor is a card that's been stuck to it. She lifts it off. And it says, may your coffee kick in before your reality, which is what we were seeing in all the books. And then on a screen, a message comes up and says, hello, sister, welcome to reality. And she looks round and she looks out of a portal, and we realize that they're on a ship, but a spaceship. They're actually in frickin' space. And it pulls away, and this ship's called the Prometheus. And that, my friends, is the end of season 1. What a roller coaster. So yeah, the whole thing, simulator, they've been running the same simulator. We don't know why, what ending they were trying to get to, but we know it's just been run hundreds of times, well, dozens and dozens of times. That she's the creator of this world, the creator of these simulations to try and stay with her dying son. We know the old man's her father. Her brother is involved in this somehow, because it's kind of what started it, that she received a letter from her brother and she's meant to get on the ship and meet him in New York. So everybody that was the main passengers are all in the simulator with her. So who are they really? What are their characters? Who are they going to be in season 2? We're going to meet her brother. What has her brother done? And this is all Project Prometheus is what it's called. And this is like sort of 1,500 passengers, 500 crew, something like that. So absolutely amazing ending. And the year's 2099. So fantastic. I mean, like I said, I didn't expect anything less from the writing team of this, and how like dark would play out. At the end of it always, just when you think you know what's going on, it completely throw you for a loop. So as I said at the start, you know, this has been in the top 10 pretty consistently. So I will be gutted if we don't get a season 2, like, you know, 1899. Are they going to call it something else? But they're going to call it 2099 season 2. Who knows? But I cannot wait to see where this show goes. There's just not enough shows with like clever writing and good characterization these days. Yeah, absolutely loved it. So as always, let me know what you think. You might have hated it. Sorry if you did, but it's definitely one of my highlights of the year. So quite a long show, this one, but I just want to talk about quite quickly because it is December and it'd be rude not to. So two events really. So yeah, we watched the Guardians of the Galaxy trailer, dropped on Friday, I think it was, or late Thursday evening. And I have to say, it looks good. It does look good. You know, James Gunn's probably the last bastion at Marvel of any sort of writing talent, and obviously this is going to be his swan song. We've got the holiday special and the volume 3 coming up in the new year. I say from that trailer, nervous. I was like, if something, it looks like Rocket's going to die, and I'm like, if something happens to Rocket, not cool. I will not be happy. And I'll be sitting in the cinema going, got something in my eye, So, but hey, looks really intriguing. Looks good. Looks fun as always. So yeah, I know there's a few people going, oh, I think Quill's going to die, so Gamora can take over the Guardians. I hope not. I mean, we know that's the Disney playbook, but hopefully, James Gunn's got a bit more sway and a bit more imagination than just, hey, let's have a woman head up the Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh, Yawnsville. So hopefully, no, Peter won't die. Hopefully, Rocket won't die. But hey, say it is the last of the Guardians films that we know of, and it's like James Gunn's swan song. So who knows? But I did want to quickly talk about the holiday special or Christmas special. It's not going to be for everyone, Personally, I really enjoyed it. I think it was just the right amount of cheese and slop that you want in a Christmas special. It's not a full-on Marvel film. It's meant to be a Christmas special. So there's just stupid stuff in there and just completely leave your brain at the door. You got obviously like Peter is heading up nowhere, trying to sort that out. He's like the administrator, and he's like just really down in the dumps because obviously Gamora's not there. This is Gamora from the past who obviously hadn't fallen in love with Pete, so she's like loser, and she was out of there in Endgame. So they want to cheer him up, and they know about this tradition of Christmas, and they kind of got some of it right, some of it but back to front. So there's some good jokes around Christmas and what Christmas is and what Santa does. So Drax and Mantis decide that they're going to get Peter a Christmas present to cheer him up. And as Peter does, all his references are from the 80s before he got kidnapped. And he's always talking about he's a legend that is Kevin Bacon and how he's this great hero and he saved this town through dancing and how he's done this, various like films and things. So they decide they're going to go get Kevin Bacon as a Christmas present for Peter. And it's just stupidness from there on in. They get to Earth, they forget to cloak, or Drax forgets to cloak the ship, so everybody sees his spaceship coming in, and they land. And then there's a kind of sort of meta scene where they're in like Hollywood, and there's all these Marvel characters. My kids are obviously going up and getting their photos. Obviously not the actors, but people cosplaying or playing Marvel characters. So obviously there's Marvel characters, but they don't know who Guardians of the Galaxy are, so it's a little bit meta. But anyway, the people just sort of, as they're there, people don't really question it or think anything of it, them looking a bit weird, but start taking selfies with them, and they start making money. So they make a ton of money out of people doing selfies with them. Then they need to resume their search for Kevin Bacon and end up in I think, gay bar. And they sort of drink alcohol for the first time, and yeah. So there's all lots of dance. Mantis dances, Drax doesn't. He's just like, that's for weak people. Anyway, they have they get drunk, spend all their money, then realize they have to look for Kevin Bacon. Where's Kevin Bacon? And a woman says, "Oh, I can tell you for $40," and gives away those maps of the stars. They've spent all their money, so Mantis uses her powers and just says, "Give it to me for free." They track down Kevin Bacon's house, basically kidnap him. Like police turn up and they kind of use their power. And there's a point where like Drax flips a police car and she's like, "You can't kill people." And thank the police because it is a Christmas special after all. Police are fine. Obviously, they she uses her power, so Kevin goes with them. Just thinks it's great and goes, and then they realize that Kevin Bacon, like, so tell us some stories, you're this, and then he goes, "Oh, that's just a role I play, that's just a role." They realize he's an actor. And there's this whole conversation around like how they hate actors and I'm throwing up in my mouth, actors are just douches and like they're just the worst people on the planet, actors, you know, and they're just like, oh no, we've got the worst present ever. Peter's gonna like be so disappointed. We like, you know, we just couldn't have got him anything worse than getting him an actor. So it's a sort of, you know, bit of a dig at the adult pretenders, as Nerdrotic calls them. But anyway, they finally get there and present. You know, they've done up nowhere with all like snow machine and lights and stuff, and Peter's like just bowled over. And Kevin Bacon's in a box, and he's like, "Guys, can you have the box? I'm going to pass out. There's no air in here." So obviously they open the box, and like Kevin, he's like, "Oh my god!" And he's like, "What have you done?" And they're like, "You kidnapped Kevin Bacon." And then he realizes that obviously she sees these powers on him, and he's like, "Undo it." And obviously she does, and he freaks out initially, and they're like, "Okay, we'll take you home." And they're sort of telling Kevin about Peter and how he was kidnapped, and how you know, he never really had good Christmases. And there's this whole story about when he's a kid that they did an animated version about, you know, Pete went to do Christmas one year, and you know, it all just got trashed, and then Yondu basically trashed the tree and the presents and stuff. And you know, we're Ravagers. We don't do Christmas. We don't do nice things for each other. And Kevin Bacon kind of hears all of this, and actually because it's Christmas, he decides to stay and plays music, and they all swap presents, and it's all just like, oh, lovely. And then eventually they take Kevin home. But and then like Mantis is talking to Peter, and he's like, "Why did you do all this?" kind of thing. You know, it's really, really sweet. And Mantis has been scared to tell Peter that she's actually his half sister, that Ego's also her father, because she thinks like every time he looks at her, he's just gonna think of Ego and his mother dying, and it's just gonna be, you know, it's just gonna give him bad memories. And so she finally sort of fesses this up, that she's his half sister. And Peter's just like made up. He's like, "Oh, this is the best Christmas present I ever could have had," and it's just like really, really sweet. And Mantis is all like, you know, teary and whatnot. But yeah, it's just absolute complete schlock and cheese, like layers, like it's like cheese overdose. But exactly what you want from a Christmas film, I think. So yeah, overall, it's quite funny. It's a good laugh. Not taking itself seriously at all. And then Peter sort of tells her the second part of the story of the whole Yondu piece. So after Yondu trashed the tree and thrown the presents away, he actually found the present that Peter got him, and it's just like a little bobblehead thing that goes, you know, on your dashboard. So Peter sort of goes into his bedroom and finds this present on his bed, and when he opens it, it's basically his guns, you know, the guns you see him with, and he was like, best Christmas present ever. And you know, so because we know from Guardians 2, Yondu was actually a bit of a softie underneath it all. And yeah, so yeah, it's just a bit, it's only like 45 minutes long, and it's fun. It's just a bit of Christmas fun. I'm sure people will hate it, but you know, it's not got the usual woke identity nonsense in it. It's just a bit of good Christmas fun. So go check it out. Have a glass of mulled wine and go check out Guardians holiday special, which I have to keep thinking because we call them Christmas specials. Holiday special. So that's it. I'm going to shut up now. Hour and a half is far too long. But thank you for sticking with me, hopefully the whole way through. I hope you've loved The Peripheral and 1899. Do go check out the old Guardians. And let's get into the Christmas spirit. That's pretty it now for shows. I'm sure there's stuff dropping, but in terms of weekly roundups, I'll probably do another couple before Christmas. But that's pretty much going to be focusing on Christmas stuff and maybe talk about some old Christmas movies and some of my favorites rather than new stuff. But there's a few, you know, cheesy, I'm sure, Christmas films to check out. I've got Spirited to watch and the Lindsay Lohan on Netflix to watch. Let's see what they're like. Give them a rating. But, you know, there's some great classics out there. This weekend is my Elf weekend. Elf Sunday. So tomorrow I will be sticking on the film Elf, putting up the tree. That's a bit of a tradition. And then I'll be on the Spacebook on Monday talking about Elf, where we do our listed. Me, Dan, hopefully Ian, some of the other guys Bobby Carner on, and we'll be talking and reminiscing about the film Elf. So I can't wait for that. It should be great fun. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Put in the comments what you think of the shows you're watching, any Christmas shows you want me to talk about. And I will see you next week. Don't overeat too much. Have fun. Bye-bye.